If you don't know me, I'm David. I'm a partner here at Seven Sage, and I'm so pleased to host Rob Schwartz of UCLA Law and Matt Dillard of GW Law. Rob Schwartz joined the UCLA School of Law in October 2006 after serving for 11 years as the Dean of Admissions at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law of Yeshiva University. A 1992 graduate of Cardozo, he practiced law for several years before entering law school admissions. Rob has served on a number of LSAT committees and most recently completed service as Secretary of the Board of Trustees for the Law School Admission Council. Matthew Dillard is the Director of Admissions at George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C. Matt is also an alum of GW Law, and he earned his BA in history from Vassar College. Matt has worked in law admissions for more than a decade and in legal higher education for more than 15 years. His favorite part of helping to assemble the GW Law entering class is getting to know students from around the country and counseling them as they contemplate their law school plans. Matt serves on the board of directors of the Northeast Association of Pre-Law Advisors and on the LSAC subcommittee on misconduct and irregularities in the admission process. He has presented on more than 100 panels before prospective law students and pre-law advisors. And he's delighted to present his 101st, or maybe more than 101st tonight. So Matt, Rob, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. I'm really happy to host you.
Nice to be here.
Happy to be here.
I'd love it if you could each tell us a little bit more about your law school. And Rob, I'll just have you go first. So could you just talk to us about what makes UCLA Law special in your eyes?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of great law schools out there. And I would say to all the prospective students listening, hopefully you can really enjoy this opportunity to investigate and research law schools. Obviously, when we work for a particular school, we think very highly of it. But part of my job also is recognizing that this may not be the right place for every single person. And part of what I like to do is as Matt does, I know, get to know students through the process and help them figure out what is going to be the best fit for them. I could talk about UCLA Law School forever. There's so much to say about the school. We bring in about 300 students each year. And I happen to think that one of the hardest things about law school, definitely at UCLA, probably at most law schools, is deciding what to study in the second and third year, because unlike undergrad, you don't have to major in a particular area. But if you want to focus and specialize at UCLA, there are about 7 different areas where you can do that. Obviously, entertainment law is one of them. We are in Los Angeles, so we have to have that as an option. But we also have a very strong program in human rights. We've recently established a big gift in a center called the Promise Institute for Human Rights. We also have a center and a specialization in the area of environmental law through our Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. We have a strong public interest law and policy program. A lot of our students go into public interest law when they graduate. We have a unique program in critical race studies, one of the few schools that offers extensive course offerings in the study of race, gender, and the law. We also have a law and philosophy specialization. I'm not sure if that's 7, but those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. And we have a pretty huge clinical program. For those of you in the audience that don't know what clinics are, definitely investigate them. Most schools offer clinics today. UCLA has about 40 different experiential clinics, and we require our students to do at least 6 credits before they graduate. I wish I had more of that in law school, where you get some hands-on opportunities to figure out what it is like to practice as a real lawyer. So short of that, I would say it's a very collegial environment here. The dean sponsors a number of get-togethers throughout the year where students and faculty come together and in our courtyard outside and are able to socialize, and that always is a nice event. So just a brief introduction.
Thanks, Rob. Matt, I'm hoping you can do the same and just tell us a little bit more about GW Law.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to be here with Rob. It's nice to have both hosts represented this evening. GW Law, for those who might not know, is actually located in Washington, D.C. We are right in the heart of downtown. So for many people who've been to Washington, D.C., they are familiar with the most publicly well-known parts of the city, like the National Mall, the Lincoln Memorial, the White House, the Capitol building. And GW Law is located just a few blocks from all of those things. So if you've been to DC and been to the Smithsonian or other famous parts of the city, you've actually been within quick walking distance of George Washington University and the law school itself, which is right on the main campus. Because we are located within the heart of one of the world's legal capitals, the idea here is to not only partake in the sort of rich curriculum of the law school, which encompasses about 275 or so different elective courses that students can take after their first year, but also to be actively engaged with life outside of the law school and get involved in field placement opportunities, internship opportunities that allow people to enhance their academic experience with actual experiential learning itself. And they can do that through internships or through clinics. You know, when you're in law school in DC, you're really existing in the cradle of so much that's happening in the world legally. Just today, my torts professor, Jonathan Turley, was on Capitol Hill testifying before the House Judiciary Committee regarding the impeachment hearings. And that kind of thing just happens all the time here. The life of the law school is incredibly robust. It's busy. I say sometimes GW Law is not really the place to go to law school if what you are looking for is a place to quietly stick your nose in a book for 3 years and never look up. That's just not the vibe here, because things are going on every day. Speakers are coming in all the time. Our Student Bar Association, which manages all of our student organizations, is awarded even by the American Bar Association for its extremely busy and robust activity and organization listing on the kinds of things that they do on a weekly basis here. So it keeps things interesting. I think people come here knowing how to lead balanced lives. And it's because people are leading balanced lives, because everybody's here to kind of do something different than their friends. It keeps things very friendly and collegial as well. So the one thing I know Rob would agree with me about is that, you know, we hope that if you're interested in either of our schools or you're interested in other schools out there, that you get the chance to visit, because that really is what is going to help you distinguish one school from another. There are so many ways in which law schools can kind of look similar if all you're doing is looking at websites or view books. So visiting really helps you get a sense of the different vibe of each institution, and we hope you'll do that.
Thanks so much. So Matt, I'm gonna go straight for the jugular here. Here's what I think everyone really wants to know. What happens after they send in their application? How does it actually work? So in as much wonky detail as you are allowed to disclose, we'd love to know, you know, are these sorted by algorithm? Who reads what file? Are faculty involved? How many people have to say yes? Anything you can tell us, I think, would be really illuminating.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And, you know, I really think that, you know, we want to share as much about the application experience itself from our end for the applicants. We don't want to hide the ball at all. So for us, when applicants apply, their application comes in through the Law School Admission Council. There's no doubt that the audience members listening here know what the LSAC is. The applications come in and they are essentially reviewed by our fantastic administrative staff to make sure that all the component parts that are required are there. Like the application itself, has the applicant completed their personal statement? Have they submitted any other optional or other statements? Do we have their letter or letters of recommendation? Is their transcript there? Do we have their LSAT score, et cetera? And once that is done, the applications are sorted very randomly. There's really no algorithm applied in our process. There's no way in which certain people are looking at certain applications and others are not. It is essentially a completely randomized process by which the three people in the admissions office, including myself, the Dean of Admission, and the Associate Director of Admission, are reviewing applications. And we are reviewing them from beginning to end. We open an application and we start at the top, we go all the way through. And the two major components of the application, to the extent that applicants may be unaware of it, are the CAS report, or the law school report, as it could be called, that's put together by the Credential Assembly Service through LSAC, which assembles the applicant's transcript, letters of recommendation, writing samples from the LSAT and the LSAT history into, the LSAC assembles that into a report. So we have that as one piece of it. The second piece is our application itself, which includes really the applicant's story, all the things about the applicant that the applicant's sharing with us, whether it's essays, optional statements, any addenda that the applicant may wish to submit, and biographical information that we're asking in our application. And that goes through a first review by one of the three people that I just mentioned. And then a decision is made on that application, whether to admit the applicant, deny the applicant, or waitlist the applicant. And then that decision is reviewed by a second person in our office to ensure that there is agreement. And most of the time there is. Once there is agreement among people in our office, typically the decision is made. Very few applicants in our admissions process are going to go to a faculty admission committee. That may be different at some law schools. That's where the process gets really particular from one law school to the next. But we typically are reserving faculty input for applications that, raise a certain question for us, whether it may be a character and fitness issue that we would like a faculty member to have get their input on, or perhaps it's an applicant where there just isn't really strong agreement among the people, the professional staff here in the admissions office who are making the decision itself.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. So I actually asked Rob this same question in a previous webinar, and I encourage you to look it up. But for now, Rob, Matt told us that when they find an applicant is iffy for some reason, there might be a character and fitness issue, there might be something else, they send it to the faculty committee for special consideration. How does UCLA Law make the decisions on the really tough applicants, on the applicants, and by tough, I mean applicants about whom it's tough to make a decision?
Well, I would say in a couple of ways. We certainly do, like Matt was describing, we do have a faculty committee that we can use at our discretion that reads a number of files each year where we want them to take a look. But it's not uncommon for us with some of those files also to conduct an interview, which we do usually via Skype. So if there's questions that we have, and I think Matt, gave a perfect example. It's not the only example, but the one that comes to mind now is character and fitness issues, where we just want to get some more information. Maybe the explanation wasn't that detailed. Maybe we want to know more about it. Maybe we want to see how the person appears about it, talks about it in person. So that would be another way to get at it. We might do both of those things. We might have an interview, and we might also then send the file onto the committee, or we might send the file onto the committee and they might say, hey, do an interview. Then we might bring it back to the committee. So it can be a combination of things depending on the particular situation. But that's pretty much how we get at that. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from both of you, starting with Rob. What sorts of things give you pause? So first, what specific kind of character and fitness issues are maybe not an automatic rejection, but really make you think? And beyond that, what other sort of things, be it maybe a big resume gap or, I don't know, you tell me, is going to make you wonder if this is going to be a good fit?
So I can try to give some examples, but I think, and I will, but I think what makes it difficult is it's impossible to think of everything. And I think just I'm afraid if I say a few things, then people think, oh, well, I don't have that, so that's not a problem. Or, oh, I do have that, so that is a problem. So I can give a few examples, but I think what's most important for people watching to know if they're going to be applying to law school is you need to think a little bit about um, not leaving any questions unanswered, number one. And number two, you need to get some good advice about about questions that you have. And I don't want to be too specific, but it's not uncommon for me to talk to somebody and maybe they weren't very specific. And I'll say, well, why weren't you more specific about that? And they'll say, oh, well, that was the advice I got from X, Y, or Z. And I'm just surprised that they wanted to get the advice from whoever that person was, as opposed to from me. I mean, I have no problem with somebody, I'm going to review the application anyway. So, I have no problem. That's what we're here for, is to try to help and advise somebody in our office. It doesn't have to be me. It could be another member of the admissions committee. But you could say, hey, I have this character and fitness issue, right? I'm going to know about it eventually. So, or if you want to do it anonymously, do it. And I want your advice on this. You might as well go right to the source. So, I think having said that, some examples could be if some incident happened relatively recently, maybe there was an issue of a plagiarism in college. Maybe there was some sort of a criminal act that somebody committed. Maybe there was a DUI. And maybe based on the explanation or lack of explanation, I have some questions about it. So those are just a few examples that are quite common, I guess, that we see. I'm sure Matt could maybe think of some others, but those are some that come right to me right now.
Yeah, Matt, could you elaborate a little bit about other things, maybe non-character and fitness issues that might give you pause that people can think about as they're putting their application together?
Sure. And I just want to echo one thing that Rob said about the character and fitness issues. A lot of times with those, the ones that really give pause would be ones where there's a pattern, where it seems like an individual had not just, one alcohol infraction, but there have been 4, something like that. And not to get, again, as Rob said, I don't want to get too mired into details because then the applicants might think too much in specific terms, but patterns are something that would raise red flags. Other than that, David, really, when we're reviewing an application, in all elements of the application, we are looking for evidence of good judgment. Being a lawyer, being a good law student, being a good member of our law school communities is going to necessitate some level of good judgment. And so when we're reviewing an application and we see evidence that really kind of raises a question about that, and that could be anything from, the way that a sensitive topic is discussed in a personal statement to something that a letter writer might say in a reference that raises a question about, personality characteristics that an applicant may have. It could be the way in which an applicant even deals with our admissions office. We note when, someone talks with one of our excellent administrative staff and may have been not treating them in the most professional of manners, So anything such as that evinces a problem with judgment is going to be a thing that could really raise that kind of red flag. And the kinds of things that could give rise to that are multitudinous and very diverse, right? So like I said, we're reading the entire application, and in every element of the application, we're keeping the issue of judgment in mind. When the members of your audience are in law school they will hear a phrase very, quite repeatedly called the reasonable person standard. And I encourage people to sort of internalize what that is, but prior to law school, I think it's fairly self-explanatory, and to invoke that during the law school admissions process. So in other words, even apart from issues of judgment per se, if they're putting together their application and they go far outside the bounds of the advice that we're providing, or the direction that we're providing as part of the application itself, and provide a 7-page personal statement when what we've requested is a 2-page personal statement, that's not a very reasonable thing to do. So, things of that sort may also just kind of raise a flag with some readers of files. And keep in mind too, you don't know who's going to be reading your application. So if you're discussing sensitive things, keep in mind that you want to treat it in a professional way, because this application is your first request to become a member of a profession. So even if you're dealing with the most personal of topics, you want to address those topics in a way that is still in comportment with the professionalism that, should be demonstrated in the application.
Can we drill down on that for a moment? We'll do sort of a lightning round of sounds okay, doesn't sound okay. Would it be appropriate under any circumstance, for example, to write a personal statement about, I don't know, a disabling gastrointestinal illness that, was a challenge that you got through, but is very personal?
I would have no problem. I've actually, probably there's not a topic you could mention that I haven't read, having done this so long.
That's so true.
Yeah, and I think one of the factors we're very clear that we consider in making admissions decisions is any challenges somebody has faced or obstacles that somebody has overcome. And so, sure, why not?
So one thing I'm taking away, because I have heard people say how personal is too personal. And one thing I'm taking from this is it's not really about the topic itself. There's probably nothing that's inherently too personal. It's about how you treat the topic. Is that fair?
I think that's absolutely right. It's funny that you mentioned that specific example, because one of the best personal statements I read last year was related to a very personal issue similar to the kind that you mentioned in your example, David. It's about the treatment of the issue, not necessarily the subject matter that's discussed itself. So people have discussed all manner of things. Like Rob says, at this point, I think we've seen countless examples of sensitive topics that have been raised in applications on a broad spectrum of, very appropriately to inappropriately.
But I think it's also important to add, lest everybody watching think that they need to come up with some unique or a circumstance or some obstacle that they have overcome. The majority of applicants, don't necessarily do that. It's a very personal decision what to write about. And I think it's important to be yourself and to share with us something about yourself that, at least in our case, we want to have some indication most of the time as to why somebody wants to go to law school. Now, not every school is going to agree with that. But at least here, sometimes we'll read a statement, it's very interesting, but there's absolutely nothing in the file about why law school. And that is at least something, even if it's just minimally, that we want to at least get something at.
Rob, how do you feel about a personal statement that's largely unrelated to your motivation for attending law school? For example, your interest in carving miniature animals and what it's taught you. And then the writer pivots to law school at the very end. The lessons that I've learned from carving miniature alligators are going to stay with me and make me a better lawyer.
That could work. I think that we, have admitted people over the year who've written personal statements that don't address at all why they want to go to law school. We have not admitted applicants who all they did in the personal statement is talk about why they want to go to law school. So there's no right or wrong to this. I just advise people, at least for us, when they're applying here, that somewhere in the application should be some indication of that. We also have a question about any of our programs that they're interested in, which somebody may or may not have an idea yet about. But if they do, it gives them another opportunity there to at least touch upon that.
Matt, what about you? Are you looking for evidence of an applicant's motivation? Do you need to know why they're going to law school? And do you need to know it from their personal statement?
Not necessarily. I mean, I come down pretty much where Rob is on this topic, which is to say that, look, you are completing a law school application. So it would perhaps behoove you in the process to have been thoughtful about why it is that you would like to go to law school, and the demonstration of that thoughtfulness could be helpful in our own decision-making process. We're not, I will say that, you know, going to law school because you're not sure what else to do is not a great reason to go to law school. So we're aware that, you know, there could be people who may be putting forth an application in that spirit. So I do think it's nice if an application is at least wrapped up, or excuse me, a personal statement is at least wrapped up, or that the application itself is at least wrapped up in some way, and in its finality with discussing why law school. That said, you know, I don't necessarily, a person does not need to know exactly what they want to do as a lawyer. It's not important to me to read, you know, that someone wants to become, you know, an international lawyer of some sort. If they want to write about that, I think that's fine, but it's not like I'm looking for, you know, someone to be very detailed in what they want to do with their careers. Because quite frankly, even many people who come into law school thinking that they know exactly what they want to do end up doing something else. You know, you're in law school to learn things, to be exposed to things. And so in the same way that members of your audience probably did not know when they were seniors in high school exactly which electives they wanted to take when they were seniors in college, because they hadn't discovered a lot about themselves and about what was out there to learn yet. In the same way, when they get to law school, they're going to learn an awful lot about all the things out there related to this incredibly broad field of law that touches every area of life in the United States and the world around us. And so we're not necessarily looking for them to pinpoint what in that broad constellation of items they're going to be pursuing specifically.
That's helpful. One question that I've seen people ask over and over again is, you know, what, if anything, can they do to help persuade you to accept them if they are either below both of your medians, both the LSAT and the GPA median, or, you know, if they're maybe at one and far below the other? What sort of thing will make you sit up and say, I just want this person in my class? And that's a very broad, poorly constrained question, but if you can answer it, I think people want to hear. I'll ask you first, Rob.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think for anybody with any particular set of numbers, right, as you said, what if somebody is at our median and has this GPA or has both numbers below, you can look, we make that information available to you to see how many people applied last year and how many people were admitted. And you will have some sense of what the likelihood is that you can do that, right? So if whatever set of numbers you are, you know, we had, let's say about 6,200 people apply to the law school last year. You know, we can narrow that down. Well, there were maybe 100 people in this group and 50 of them were admitted, or 2 were admitted, or 90 were admitted, and you will have, right, some sense of your likelihood. And it is the kinds of other non-numerical factors that are going to matter more depending on, you know, where you fall. If you're in that 50% bucket, well, those non-numerical factors are obviously going to matter a lot. If it's, you know, 1 or 2, boy, you know, it's sort of like winning the lottery, right? Something's going to have to really stand out. What could those things be there could be so many things, we could go on for 3 hours about examples of that, but it could be somebody, for example, we see this a lot, right, who's been out of undergraduate school for a long time. Maybe they didn't do very well in undergraduate school for whatever reason. Maybe it was a long time ago. They just weren't serious about it. They had some health issues. They whatever they were dealing with at that time. But now they've applied. Now they've had a whole career. They want to go to law school. They've done well on the LSAT, and the committee may look at that and say, well, we just don't think that these grades are as predictive as somebody who is 22 and applying right out of college. We don't have much more there to look at. So that could be one example. Or, as I mentioned earlier, we have this question about, are there any of our programs that we think you could contribute to? So we have the Epstein program in public interest law and policy. Maybe somebody, although their numbers are below both medians, maybe they have had an incredible career so far in the public sector, and the committee feels that they're going to go on and change the world. So there's just way too many examples that you could give, but I think what's relevant to an applicant is to apply to a range of schools. And so look up those numbers, at least where you can, right? All schools, at least at a minimum, are going to publish their 25th percentile, their medians, and their 75th. And it's very easy to have a sense of your odds. And sure, take some chances. Apply to some schools where maybe your chances are low, but you never know, right? That could happen. And also apply to some schools that you've researched that you'd be happy to attend, where your odds are high, right? And then apply to a whole range, a bunch, depending on how many you can afford to apply to, that are in the middle, right? Where you have a 50-50 chance, and then it'll work out. From that perspective, hopefully that's more relevant than for me trying to articulate every possible example. And plus, we're just people reading these files. We never know what's going to be presented in front of us and what might move a committee. I think I have to, we have to be realistic that, and we could talk about this for a long time, but law schools are ranked, right? I'm sure everybody watching knows about U.S. News and World Report rankings, which, we could talk about for a while, but the bottom line is 25% of a law school's ranking is based on 3 criteria, and 2 of those criteria represent the bulk of that, and that's the median LSAT and the median GPA. Medians, not average. So we have to pay attention to our medians, but when it comes to the 50% of the class that's going to be below those medians, we can look at a lot of these other factors that are important to us. So that's the best way I can think of to explain it.
Matt, I'll let you comment on that if you want to. I also have another question about undergraduate transcripts. So do you have anything to add to what Rob said?
I think Rob gave a great answer. At the end of the day, everybody needs to they need to tell their story as effectively as possible in their application. Because somebody who's going to get in against the sort of odds, Rob, the sort of example that Rob cited of, 2 people out of 100 might have gotten in a particular category. Anybody who's going to get in with those kinds of odds is going to first do so because they told a great story, and because whoever is reading their application for whatever reason, and we could all imagine the reasons that would exist, whoever's reading their application is thinking, whatever the case is with this person's GPA or LSAT, I want this person to be a member of our law school community. And that's going to happen first because you've told your story very effectively. So, but I think Rob gave a great answer.
Given that GPA matters so much and that U.S. News does not care how difficult it was for, a certain student to get a certain GPA, how closely do you pay attention to a student's major, to their undergraduate institution, to the difficulty of their curriculum, and to all these things that are hard to quantify? Yeah.
Well, Rob and I could probably write a thesis on, as well as all of our colleagues across many law schools in this country could write you a thesis on our problems with U.S. News. We do not necessarily endorse it. we live in, and it is what it is sort of universe. But one of the problems with the US news methodology is, just as you say, its focus on sort of a median GPA does not permit methodologically for US news itself, for example, to take into account things such as the difficulty of curriculum, of school, of challenges that a student may have faced while they were in college, including certain things that, you know, we've not discussed tonight, like, has somebody been working 30 hours a week while they're in school in order to help pay for it? I mean, that's a big deal, right? However, we are looking at those things. When we are assessing an application for admission, we're looking at where the student went to school and how they performed. I think our feeling is, how has this applicant in all phases of their life, including in their academic curriculum, how have they performed within the context of the circumstances of their own life and within the circumstances of their academic environment? And so we are helping to contextualize that in our review process. It's not simply looking at, you know, a GPA and that's it. You know, we're reviewing the actual transcript. We're looking at how the applicant did over time. We're looking at what else the applicant may have been involved with during college to help sort of assess the GPA in that context. We're seeing where they went to school. All kinds of things are going into that. I will say that, you know, there are some rigorous majors out there. But I do find that oftentimes people who have participated and been deeply involved in those rigorous majors as students have oftentimes made up for perhaps a lower GPA by doing a little bit better on the LSAT. So it's not like they're not bringing, you know, a metric to the table, so to speak, in the admissions process oftentimes. But certainly, you know, we are within our ability to do so, we are looking at all elements of an applicant's academic record. And that includes things that go beyond just sort of assessing things in search of a particular median LSAT.
Okay, I've gone over time and I want to hand it over, but there's one more question I want to ask, and it's tough. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, Hemingway style. But if you could give one piece of advice to someone who knows they're going to apply to law school in 2 or 3 years, but hasn't yet, in 6 words or fewer, what would it be? If this is possible.
They're going to apply in 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, or just in the future. They're not applying right now.
I'm going to go, you know, there's a lot. I'm going to go with give some thought to who you're going to recommend you and get to know those people.
Think about recommenders.
Yeah.
Or cultivate recommenders.
Cultivate
recommenders. Okay.
I would say, don't worry about us. Meaning, when you're making decisions about elective classes or what to get involved with on campus, or whether to take a time between undergrad and law school, or what to do at that time if you do take it, or what internship to take, none of those decisions should be made on a substantive level by your hope for what may happen in the law school admissions process, because we're looking for people of all kinds of backgrounds. So, you know, you do your best to live your life in a way that is befitting your interests, and that serves you well, and put your best foot forward when you apply 2 or 3 years from now. But for now, you don't need to worry about us.
That's great advice. Don't worry about us, and connect with your potential recommenders. If you have a question, we would prefer it if you raise your hand so we can hear your voice. We will look at questions that you type if nobody wants to raise their hand, but it's so nice to talk to you all. So I'm sure somebody's going to raise their hand. Great. Cindy, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. That should work now.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay. Hello, Mr. Schwartz and Mr. Dilard. It's very nice of you to give us such useful advice. And I'm an international student. Actually, I graduated from a university that is not in an English-speaking country. And I often heard that for law schools, because maybe the admission officers, they don't know much about, they might not be familiar with foreign universities, so they tend to emphasize a lot on our LSAT scores. So they might pick international students based on the 75th percentile score. Is it true? And also, I want to ask about scholarships. So for what kind of students would you really like to give them scholarships? Is there any particular criteria, or what kind of characters is the ones that you prefer? And also for international students, as I said, because admission officers might not be familiar with foreign universities, might not know about their curriculums or the difficulty of their curriculums or other stuff. So what criteria do you usually use to evaluate an international student? Thank you.
Matt, I'm going to turn over the first question to you.
Sure.
Is it true that law schools are only admitting international students with who hit the 75th percentile median? And more broadly, are international students at some sort of disadvantage, and how do you evaluate them?
No, international students are not at a disadvantage. You know, at GW Law, and I'm sure the same is true at UCLA Law as well, we receive quite a number of applicants who have attended, who are international students and who have attended non-US schools. So we are actually quite accustomed to those kinds of applicants, and they are not disadvantaged in the process. In other words, we're not looking for them to necessarily jump through a hurdle that other applicants are not expected to do. So for example, the 75th percentile on the LSAT is not some kind of requirement, hidden or otherwise, in looking at international applicants. That said, I will say that I do think the LSAT probably weighs more heavily for international applicants than it does for applicants who have gone to US and Canadian colleges. The reason for that is simple, and that is because international applicants are not coming to us with a GPA that has been calculated by LSAC. And so ultimately the LSAT becomes the sort of single academic numeric metric that we have in that application. But we're still looking at their academic record. There are a lot of times, frankly, when you know, I've recommended admission for an international applicant who was a little bit below on our LSAT and did not have a GPA because they were bringing to the table, you know, quite stellar credentials in other ways, from their performance in a school overseas, or their work professionally. So I just know in our own experience here at GW Law that it's simply not the case that, you know, you have to have some sort of 75th percentile or something like that in order to be considered for admission. But again, I do think that you know, the LSAT probably is a bit more important because it is the one academic metric that we have. The one thing I would say about you know, international applicants is the same as I was saying about other applicants as well, which is the application is your opportunity to tell your story. So for example, you know, one of the questions that Cindy asked was about the difficulty of the curriculum and would we know about that? Now, fortunately, if you're applying to a school that has a fair number of international applicants, it could be that, you know, people like me reviewing the application do have some sense of what, you know, what the school's curriculum is like, wherever that school may be. But if there's any concern about that, it's incumbent upon the applicant herself to perhaps through an addendum discuss what she studied and you know, what her academic experience was like at that non-US school. And if that helps the applicant feel better that we're going to have a better sense of their story, then by all means do that.
Thanks. Rob, can I just turn part 2 over to you? How do you make decisions about financial aid for international applicants or for domestic applicants?
Yeah.
Merit-based financial aid, I want to qualify.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I first of all, I don't know if everybody out there has heard of the ABA 509 reports, but that is a very good opportunity for any law school that you're interested in to take a look at, because all the information is in the same format. And one piece of the information that you'll find there is what percentage of the student body receives a scholarship, and actually you'll get more detailed information on how much scholarship money is given out, like what's the 25th percentile, the median, the 75th percentile, how many get full tuition, things like that. In terms of how we do it, every school may be a little bit different, so it's always helpful to check with your individual schools that you're looking at. But here at UCLA, there's both a need component and what we call a merit component. For the need component, applicants need to apply for it. They need to fill out the FAFSA, and they need to fill out our own institutional application. Now, with international applicants, it's difficult. We cannot consider them for need-based aid. We can't because they're just not able to attach a US tax return that we're going to be able to analyze. So when it comes to international applicants, just as a quick aside, we will take that into account when we're trying to award a package, and any international admitted student is welcome to share their financial circumstances with me, with our financial aid office. We'll do the best we can. But largely our packages are going to be based on need, if you want us to consider that, and then what we call merit, which is going to be largely based on your grades and your test scores. Now, it's not that the other components of your application aren't relevant. They are. And that's why, you know, I'm sure some members of your audience are familiar with the website lawschoolnumbers.com, right? You can go on there for UCLA, and you know, not everybody is telling the truth there, but I find it to be largely accurate. But you will see differences in people with the same LSAT and GPA in terms of the amount they're given. And that is based on the other factors, but the differences aren't usually huge. And so that might be a little bit here, a little bit there, based on some other aspects of the file. Things like you were talking about earlier that Matt was addressing. So maybe somebody has a similar GPA as somebody else, but it was a more rigorous program, or it was at a school where there's more grade deflation. So those are the kinds of things we can look at a little bit with the scholarship process, but it is largely based on the numbers there.
Thanks, Rob. Kimberly, you can unmute yourself. Are you there, Kimberly? We can't hear you. Okay, I'm going to let you try to figure out your microphone. And in the meantime, I'm going to call on Bradley. So Bradley, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, hello, thank you. Just curious, what kind, or maybe you guys could explain, maybe there's not a disadvantage to applying a little bit later in the cycle. For example, maybe you took the October, November LSAT and didn't get the score you wanted, and so you want to take again in January. If all other aspects of the application are done and ready to go by the time you get that January score, which would be, you know, beginning mid-February, are applicants that are in that position at any type of disadvantage other than maybe, you know, I get that scholarships are being awarded at this time, but other than that, is there any disadvantage to that?
Matt, can you take this one first?
Sure. You know, I know that there is a lot of concern among applicants about what's referred to as rolling admission. And some are so concerned about it that they sort of have this, I think, false notion that, for example, if they haven't applied by some arbitrary date in October, for example, that their chances will decline their chances of admission will decline with each passing day. And that's not really how it works. I think generally speaking, you want to apply when your application is going to be strongest, not when it's going to be fastest. So in Bradley's case, for example, if that means that, in fact, you know, taking the January LSAT means that he would be applying with a score that's maybe a few points higher than the score that he might have earned in the fall, then that's better than trying to rush an application in when it's not going to be at its strongest and when it's not going to reflect the applicant's best potential, because that's what we're looking for in the admissions process. I want to say too that that may be true as well of some students who are applying as college seniors. If they started out in college and had a rocky freshman year for whatever reason, and they have been experiencing an upward trend in their grades, then perhaps they don't want to be first out of the gate with their application because their fall grades during their senior year are in all likelihood going to continue that improvement trend. And the more evidence there is of that, the better their grades will look overall. And so at the very least, they would want to update their application with their fall grades once they came in. All of that said, obviously we are admitting people. Rolling admission essentially means that we are admitting people all throughout the admission cycle, and that people will find out their decision. The date when they find out their decision will be roughly correlated to the date when their application became complete. So it is certainly true that, you know, if you're waiting until the very end of the application cycle, you could face a more uphill climb than if you were able to get your application in earlier. You know, so all things equal, I think it would be great for people who are going to have their strongest applications earlier in the cycle to go ahead and apply earlier. But I think given the specific circumstances that Bradley is discussing, and which certainly don't just affect Bradley, but affect a whole host of applicants, you know, I think applying later with a stronger score would probably be better. And in fact, you know, people should take down their nervousness and anxiety about rolling admission just a little bit, because people are so anxious about it, when in fact we're still going to receive about half of our applications after the new year begins. So it's not like everybody has applied in September and October and that we're completely finished with our, you know, with admitting people before the winter break.
Thanks, Matt. Nicole, I'm going to go to you. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. Are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, Matt and Rob. Thanks so much for this. This has a lot of useful information. Rob talked about a student who has been out of school for a long time. I just want to clarify that. I've been out of school. I graduated from GW in 2015, so about 4 years ago. Is that considered a long time? And I have letters of recommendations from 2 professors there, but should I have one that's from my employer, since I have been out of school for 4 years? And my second question is, I have a 6-month gap in my resume during which I was job searching. Should I include an addendum explaining this gap in my application?
Can you take this one, Rob?
Sure. So a bunch of questions there. Let me start with the most recent, see if I get them all. I would include an addendum on the gap. It doesn't have to be long, but just briefly, just want to point out to the committee that, you know, you were looking for a job during that period. With regard to letters of recommendation, that's another whole topic that we could get into. Each school is going to perhaps be different. So here at UCLA, we require 2 letters, but we leave it up to you to decide who should write them. If you felt, in my opinion, if you felt that all 3 of those letters, the 2 academic and the 1 from work, were equally strong, I would choose 1 academic and 1 work letter, but you certainly could be admitted with 2 academic strong letters as well. So we leave it up to you, but unfortunately we can't take 3. And then I think your first question was, well, is 2015 a long time? And that's why I always worry about giving a specific example, because, you know, in my mind though, and this is just me, no, that wasn't an the example that I had in mind. I'm talking about somebody who's maybe been out of school. And again, there's no it's not like if I say 10 years that 9 doesn't qualify, but I had more in mind when I gave that example. But work experience is something that we value and that we look at, and absolutely having a number of years of work experience will be valued in the process. But the example I was giving was just in my mind, for what it was worth, was somebody who really bombed college, right? And then has had a whole career for a number of years, did incredibly well on the LSAT, and just says, look, I wasn't serious. I'm not the person I was back then. So it's not 3 or 4 years that has gone by. It's a longer period of time.
Yeah, I'm going to call on Kimberly. Kimberly, if you can make your microphone work, that's fine. And if not, I'll just read your question. Kimberly asks, can you touch on wait lists? What are the chances a student who has been put on your school's wait list will get in? Matt, what are we thinking? 31? 80?
If only we all had a crystal ball. The most frustrating part about the waitlist admission process is that we don't know much, certainly not at this point. And oftentimes, once we get to that process, there are unknowable things that are unknowable to both the applicant and to us on the admissions side. And so we kind of share that, we have a commonality with people who are waiting on wait lists. In some years at GW, we've had a fairly robust, wait list admission process. And in other years, there was a couple of years ago when we admitted, I think, 0 people from the wait list from April until August. Deposit deadlines at law schools tend to be in April. There could be some variation among schools, but essentially April is the month when most law schools are requiring most applicants to let them know by placing a seat deposit whether or not they intend to enroll. And so no law schools are really going to know anything until that point about, what the potential for admission from the wait list is going to be. And then even after that, the reason that I say there are things that are unknowable to those of us on the admission side and waitlisted applicants is that even after that, the waitlist process can be so fluid. Because, things happen in the lives of people who've submitted even seat deposits. People get a promotion at a job and decide that they're going to defer their enrollment, or a family issue comes up and they decide that they're not going to be able to attend law school that year. Or they get in off the wait list at, another school that they truly want to attend. And so even though they've submitted a seat deposit at one school, they give that seat deposit up in order to attend a different school. And so these kinds of things happen, oftentimes deep into the summer. And so it truly is an unpredictable process. And we share in the, the sense of frustration that some applicants who are on the wait list may have about that. That said, if you're on the wait list, honestly, the most important thing that you can do is to tell us, credibly that you are interested in our school, that you are, likely to attend if admitted, and to demonstrate that interest with some sincerity. Perhaps if you have the means and the opportunity to, you might want to come visit us. Making sure that we're aware of your level of interest, because the fact is we want the waitlist process to move expeditiously. And if and when we make offers of admission, we're going to want a fairly quick turnaround time for the applicant to let us know that they're going to be able to attend.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much. I'm afraid that we're out of time. It went really fast from my point of view. I'm sure that there are so many more good questions that we just didn't have a chance to throw to you, but I am so grateful to both of you, Matt and Rob, for making yourselves available and sharing your knowledge. On the whole, I just got the impression that you're thoughtful, you're not scary, and that you're really trying to understand what's going on from the other side of the desk. You're not rejecting people on a whim. You're just thinking about, what circumstances led to the very small and minimal product in front of you? You know, what was the context? And maybe the corollary to that is that if you're applying, help them understand the context. It sounds like they're interested in the context. They want to know, you know, why your transcript looks the way it does, et cetera. But it's reassuring to know that it's maybe harder than people think to make like one tiny accidental blunder that's going to completely doom them. And just to know that you're honoring all the work that they put into their application by reading it carefully. So thank you both so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks for having us. It's always great, and people have so many great questions, and I hope that they found it helpful.
Yeah, and if anyone has further questions, they're welcome to follow up.
Same with me.
I hope we do this again.
Me too. All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Good night.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Bye-bye.